Dr. Phil Plait of badastronomy.com has called on all skeptics to, quote, "Don't be a jerk." Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for April 2011, the podcast where we don't listen to Phil Plait. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's dive right into news of the bogus.
Are you willing to take his test?
Yeah.
Are you willing to take his test?
Yeah.
Sylvia would not take the test, bottom
No,
line.
because she has nothing to prove to James or Randy. Nothing to prove to James or Randy.
Are you willing to take his test?
Yeah.
Nothing to prove to James or Randy.
Are you willing to take his test?
Nothing to prove to James or Randy.
If you don't know who Sylvia Browne is, I envy you. But she makes a lot of money pretending to be a psychic and giving people all sorts of bogus advice, including medical advice, at the bargain basement price of $700 a pop. She is well known for her completely wrong predictions, including telling Sean Hornbeck's parents that their missing son was dead. Turns out, Hornbeck and another boy were found alive years later, having been held by their kidnapper all that time. Well, come to find out, Sylvia, who has advised lots of people, including James Randi, that they're about to have heart problems and need to be checked out, has herself had a heart attack, according to Hawaii Reporter, which writes, Monday, March 21, she suffered a heart attack. She was about to return home when the event occurred. Gee, she didn't see it coming? She's a psychic who warns people about their health problems and misses her own? Now, not even this podcast would be bogus enough to kick someone when they're down. Sylvia's going to be okay. So it's funny as well as sad that an email sent to her supporters read, "We do not yet know how long Sylvia will have to be hospitalized in Hawaii, nor when she will be able to return to her normal work-related activities." Man, she's really having an off day. Isn't this like a concert pianist who suddenly can't even play chopsticks? The email asks for your prayers and positive thoughts. It also asks for your money. It even included a form to fill in your credit card details. Gee, if I got paid $700 for a 20-minute phone call, I would think I'd at least be able to afford decent insurance. The letter did give one clue to what might have gone wrong, though, when it said that Sylvia literally put her heart into her mission. Yeah, literally. I'm not a doctor, but that sounds very ill-advised to me. If you're going to put your heart into your mission, best to do it metaphorically, not literally. Keep your heart in your chest where it belongs. And for that matter, you should keep your money in your wallet and not give it to this woman's mission or any other psychic trying to make a cheap buck giving you bogus information. For more information on this dreadful woman, go to stopsylvia.com.
I've got a cupboard full of tapes that were sent by Sylvia to the customers who paid the $700, and they say in so many words she was wrong, all the way down the line.
She's dead.
Yes.
You're telling me my mother has died?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll have to get back to you after I've called her.
Are you willing to take his test?
Nothing to prove to James or Randy.
Are you willing to
Isn't it so great that we have a government that uses our tax dollars to protect us from lawbreakers like Girl Scouts? When two Girl Scouts in Hazelwood, Missouri set up a cookie stand in their front yard, they became the top sellers in their troop. That is, until city officials came in and shut it down. Why? Because there's a city ordinance prohibiting sales out of a residence. It only took one busybody neighbor to complain, and officials shut the stand down. When local press questioned them on it, spokesman Tim Davidson said it was because the cookie sales were causing the neighbors' dogs to bark too much. Isn't it the responsibility of the neighbors to keep their own dogs quiet? And since when does the government have any legitimate authority to tell you can't sell stuff on your own property? What's next, shutting down yard sales? Davidson said the officials had no choice but to shut it down. What a load of crap! All officials have something called discretion. More than that, each and every one of them swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and they violated that oath. The issue was resolved, at least for now, when a very generous member of the community bought the remaining 36 boxes, and the girls met their sales goal. Afterwards, he helped them go door to door giving the cookies to their neighbors for free, including the busybody who complained. Now that's class. Meanwhile, Davidson is firm that the ban will stay in place, but the girls insist they're going to put the stand back up next cookie season. Here's hoping that most of America's youth have the same spirit as these two young girls. A French couple is mourning the loss of their daughter, but they're also facing jail because they practically starved her to death. Despite the fact that it's usually recommended to start your baby on solid food around 4 to 6 months, they kept her solely on breast milk until she died at 11 months. Now, there's nothing wrong with breast milk at that age, and in most cases this wouldn't have been an issue, but this couple were vegans. As a result, the mother's breast milk was severely deficient in many vitamins and minerals, especially vitamin A and vitamin B12. Now, surely if a baby's in that bad health, there would be signs, right? Sure, but this couple were also into alternative medicine. And they didn't believe in traditional medicine, not even when their daughter caught bronchitis. Instead, they gave her clay and cabbage poultices. They wouldn't even take her to the hospital when her 9-month checkup showed that she was losing weight. The baby only weighed 12.5 pounds when she died, when she should have weighed 18. Whenever some skeptic or another speaks out against things like extreme veganism or alternative medicine, there's always someone around saying, "Why bother them? They're not hurting anybody." Well, here's the corpse of an 11-month-old baby that says otherwise. Well, now the TSA can say that they've protected us from one threat. She wasn't a terrorist. She wasn't a hijacker. She was a witch. Carol Smith was fired from her post as a TSA officer at Albany National Airport. By all accounts, she was an exemplary employee and keenly caught many potential threats. But she was fired after a coworker complained that she's a Wiccan, that she practices witchcraft.
That I had put a spell on that I had cast a spell on the heater of her car, and she was afraid of me because I'm Wiccan and I practice witchcraft. No. If I could do that, if I had the power and really thought that I could do something like that, I wouldn't have been working for TSA.
The TSA cited this as a reason to fire her. I'm sorry, but in a case like that, you investigate the coworker. You check for booze and test for drugs and then maybe do a psychological exam. Why would the TSA use this clearly bogus reason to get rid of her? Turns out there may be more to it. According to her personnel file, she repeatedly complained about lax security at the airport.
The metal detector's here, the x-ray machine here, and in between there's like a gate. And there was one supervisor that every time he would walk through there, he would never close the gate. So I did file a complaint about it with management, which it never stopped anyway. So management never did anything.
The TSA, making life safer for, well, themselves, I guess. The North Carolina Supreme Court has ruled 5-1 that the state's restrictions on new political parties, among the strictest in the country, do not violate the North Carolina Constitution. To get on the ballot in 2012, a new political party must gather over 85,000 valid signatures. And to get that many to pass the validation process, they actually have to collect more like 150,000. Costs of petitioning are high. You do good to come out spending as little as $1 a signature. So this amounts to a $150,000 filing fee to obtain ballot access. And of course, the new party will be left with very little funds to actually run candidates. In fact, the only party to have achieved ballot access under these restrictions is the Libertarian Party. The Green Party and other parties haven't been able to surmount these obstacles. The court claims that the Libertarian Party's success proves that a handful of voters can achieve this objective. What they didn't say was that this took the party 3.5 years and over $100,000 to complete. And if they hadn't made it, then after the election, they would have had to start all over again, from scratch. Their only evidence was the fact that the Libertarian Party did it, but just because a restriction isn't impossible to overcome does not mean that it's reasonable. It's even worse. Let's say that a party gets on the ballot and elects candidates to local office. If that party doesn't have a candidate for president or governor, or if neither of those candidates get at least 2% of the vote, then these local incumbents, selected by the people, would not have a place on the ballot in the next election. Oh, and if the Libertarian Party hadn't made it past these hurdles, then most of the races for State House and Senate would have been completely unopposed, in Soviet-style races with only one candidate. Article 1, Section 10 of the North Carolina Constitution specifically states, and I quote, "All elections shall be free." Also, Article 6, Section 6 says, in its entirety, every qualified voter in North Carolina who is 21 years of age, except as in this Constitution disqualified, shall be eligible for election by the people to office. Apparently, the North Carolina Supreme Court thinks that this means the state can impose $100,000 in costs and stop eligible candidates from being voted for without running afoul of these clauses. They also made factual errors in their decision, like saying that other states such as Ohio only allow party members to sign such a petition. It doesn't. To justify their decision, the opinion cites the avoidance of voter confusion, ballot overcrowding, and frivolous candidates. So wait, voters get confused if they have more than 2 or 3 candidates? Or even one? Do they not think that voters go grocery shopping? I guess it's a good thing these voters never go into the cereal aisle with all those choices. Different brands, different kinds, cereal in boxes, cereal in bags, cold cereal, hot cereal, cereal with fiber, with whole grains, sugar, marshmallows. With all those choices, the average North Carolina voter must get completely confused and fall down in the aisle whimpering, according to the Supreme Court. Give me a break. If anything, North Carolina has a problem with not enough candidates on the ballot. Ballot overcrowding is equally bogus. Before these restrictions were passed in 1981, any party that obtained 10,000 signatures qualified for ballot access. In that time, no more than 4 parties were ever on the ballot at any one time. North Carolina voters had a greater choice of sodas than they did political parties. As for frivolous candidates, how fortunate the voters of North Carolina are that they have the state to tell them which candidates are frivolous and which ones aren't. Come on! Shouldn't voters be making that decision themselves? Ballot access law expert Richard Winger said of the decision, "The NC Supreme Court certainly wrongly decided the case. It is outrageous that the court ignored an overwhelming amount of evidence. The requirement was not raised in order to stop ballot clutter, as the record in the lawsuit showed. The requirement was raised because legislators were upset that the Socialist Workers' Party had qualified for the ballot in 1980, the first time that a Marxist political party had ever appeared on a government-printed ballot in North Carolina." What isn't being said in the press is that this isn't just about the right of political parties or candidates. It's about the right of voters. Voters have the right to vote for any constitutionally eligible candidate. Yet not only is the North Carolina government preventing them from voting for candidates who aren't members of approved political parties or gone through the heinous requirements to run as an independent, they even actively discard write-in votes when those write-in candidates haven't previously been approved by the state. Which way should it work? Should voters control the government, or should government control the voters? With this decision, the only relief that can come to North Carolina voters is from the legislature. They've already introduced House Bill 32, the Electoral Freedom Act, which is sponsored by Democrats, Republicans, and the one and only independent. This bill would take the requirements back down to its previous level of 10,000 signatures. Good luck to the voters in North Carolina. And now it's time to announce who gets the mark of shame that comes with the name Biggest Bogon Emitter. The economy seems to have taken yet another hit as consumer confidence falls. According to the Associated Press, the Consumer Confidence Index has fallen to 63.4. 90 indicates a healthy economy. The biggest reason? Inflation, combined with low expectations of income increases. Consumers know all too well, intuitively if not intellectually, that inflation is making the price of everything they buy higher, and that if income does increase in response, it won't do so until much later. That's Economics 101. And they're right. According to CNBC, the cost of living is at a record high, which is funny since the Federal Reserve is still insisting that there's no inflation. Why is the Fed's analysis so much at odds with what the people know? Because the Fed have excluded almost everything that people actually buy from their inflation index, such as the cost of food. William Dudley, president of the New York Fed, said that there was no inflation because you can buy an iPad 2 for the same price as an iPad 1 3 years ago. Did no one inform him that technology is supposed to get cheaper as it gets more powerful? Or did he sleep through that part of Economics 101? The Fed still insists that inflation is around 2%. But if you use the same metric as existed in the inflation scare in 1980, when inflation approached 15%, then the result from that is that currently inflation is really around 9.5%. Inflation takes wealth from our paychecks and from our savings and gives it to banks and to Wall Street. Doing that is bad enough. Lying about it, or being so incompetent that they don't understand it, is going way beyond what's required to get the Federal Reserve named this week's Biggest Bogon Emitter. And now it's time to name this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! When someone submits a nomination for this non-award for nonsense, which you can do by sending an email to podcast@bogosity.tv, it is given due consideration. When 2 or more people nominate the same dolt in the same week, it's truly significant. Such is the case with this week's loser winner, David John Wellman. Virgil 0211 and Lord T. Hawkeye have both nominated this idiot non-savant because of his pathetic attempts to support that fastigium of fascism known as the social contract.
Taxation is actually part of the social contract, a contract that every American is bound to. You can read this contract in the U.S. Constitution.
This dogmatic dullard has apparently never even read the Constitution, or he would know that no citizen anywhere in the United States is bound to it. If someone comes onto your property and starts preaching, you can throw him off your property, by physical force if necessary, without running afoul of his First Amendment protections to freedom of speech or religion. It's not citizens that are restricted by the Constitution, it's government. Whenever anyone in government takes office, from Congress and the President, to governors and state legislators, to local councilmen, every bureaucrat, every soldier, every cop on the beat, swears an oath to defend the Constitution. The Constitution is not there to limit the people or bind them to some contract they never agreed to. It's there to limit the government and bind them from intruding in our lives. This social contract bogosity is nothing more than a surreptitious way of sneaking in the ancient concept of the divine right of kings. Only now, it's the law and the lawmakers and law enforcers who have this divine right. At any time, they can change the terms of the contract, and if they say they get to scan your junk when you get on a plane, then you just have to accept it. It's fascism, it's totalitarianism, and it is completely against everything this country was founded for.
Your parents entered into the contract when you were born, by choosing for you to live here and have citizenship in the United States.
Sorry, but parents and legal guardians cannot enter into a contract for a minor. When a child actor or model is hired, the contract is made with the parents. The parents are not agents. They, not the child, are bound to the terms of the contract. And in contract law, agents themselves are not bound to the terms, only the principal. And agency is invalid if the principal is unable to understand the terms of the contract. The child is not bound to the contract, is not acted against if the contract is breached, and cannot be held to it once the child comes of age. At that point, a contract with the child must be signed.
And the contract renewed automatically when you turned 18.
Sorry, it just doesn't work that way. A contract becoming effective due to inaction is legally known as estoppel. But estoppel does not apply to someone just turning 18 when they never agreed to anything before. It happens when they take action that demonstrates the truth of something without them confronting it at the time. And besides, a breach of contract is a civil matter, not a criminal. No breach of contract justifies someone being put in jail.
Fortunately, like all ethical contracts, you have the right to get out of the contract anytime you want. All you have to do is renounce your citizenship and leave the country.
But that's known as duress, and it automatically invalidates any contract. The concept he's trying to dance around here is called tacit consent, and it is soundly rejected by contract law. Besides, all someone leaving the country can do is go to a different country, where presumably a whole new social contract awaits them that they can't get out of agreeing to. Not to mention the fact that when you leave the country, you have to go through this wonderful government to get to it. A government that can stop you at customs, scan your naked body, and even detain you indefinitely without habeas corpus, even after you've been acquitted, according to President Obama. So the one way you can get out of this contract, which is duress anyway, only means that you're subject to another one, and the government can stop you from doing it if they want. This completely rules out the possibilities of rebellion, nullification, and civil disobedience, all of which were crucial to the founding of our country and the protection of our rights. The more we get away from these concepts, the more our civil liberties will get violated by people who think they can just make up the terms of this phantom contract as they go along. The fact is, if his ridiculous contract were to be claimed by someone acting on their own and taken to a court of law, it would be stricken down on every single ground that exists for doing so. Contracts require mutual consent, meaning that both parties have to actively agree to it. An offer and acceptance, also known as meeting of the minds, which obviously doesn't exist in his description. Consideration, which has to do with an evaluation of the detriment versus the bargain, something else that no one gets to do. Both parties must have the capacity to contract. the awareness that they are doing so, and why would he have to tell us this if we were aware of it? The parties must intend to form a legal relationship, and the parties must consent to all of the terms. Past consideration is inefficient to claim contractual obligation, as is pre-existing duty. Duress, undue influence, unconscionability, and frustration of purpose all can be used as arguments to void a contract, and all apply to Wellman's bogus social contract. A contract just is not assumed to be valid unless all parties agree to it voluntarily, and simply not leaving is not enough to do the trick. But I guess if Wellman accepts all of that, then he too must accept that, by making such a completely asinine argument, he contractually agreed to be this week's Idiot Extraordinaire!
Are you willing to take his test?
Nothing to prove to James Randy.
Are you willing to take his test?
Nothing to prove to James Randy.
Well, that's all for this week. Thank you for listening to the Bogosity Podcast. And please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity Podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from George Carlin. Keep in mind that the Nazis were elected in a full, free, democratic election. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.
Wrong, all the way down the line. We've been offering at the James Randi Educational Foundation a $1 million prize now for many, many years. And Sylvia Browne agreed on international television that she would take the challenge. Then she announced to me that she didn't know how to reach me. A psychic didn't know how to reach me? She can't use the telephone book?
What would exactly that test be, very quickly?
Very quickly, well, she would do readings for 10 people that would be chosen because they believe Sylvia Browne and they believe she has powers and they believe in psychic powers of that sort. She would do 10 readings. We would then shuffle those 10 readings and give them all to the people who had the readings done for them and ask them to sort them out. Which one is your reading? It should be pretty evident that you could take the reading that was made for you,
Linda,
and you could select
would
it
Sylvia
out.
Browne take that test?
Absolutely not, because she has nothing. It's low.
She already
All right, he's
agreed
coming
to do
from
it.
Wait a minute, Randy.
She
I'd like you
agreed
to talk
to do
now.
it.
Let me talk.
No shouting, no shouting.
Somebody who's an atheist is already coming to.
Oh, come on, get off the atheist thing.
All right, so Linda.
Her spiritual work speaks for itself.
Well, we'll let the audience.
To take the test
We'll let the
6
audience be the
years
judge.
ago.